Welcome to part two of the. Welcome to part two of the. Welcome to part two of the statistical breakdown of Champs 2024. Yesterday we took a look at Pacific and EMEA. Today we're going to do that for China and Americas. And at the very end of the video as well, I'm going to talk about kind of all of the teams and what maps are going to be the most important maps at Champs for you to look out for. And one particular team might have a pretty big advantage. Okay, so we're going to start with the Chinese teams then, and we're going to start with BLG, the Chinese 4 seed. And the thing about BLG, as you can kind of see in these numbers as well, and, you know, my rating's kind of down the side here, is that BLG have a kind of weird map pool where they're kind of just like okay at everything. Obviously, their Haven isn't great, and actually Haven is the map they started banning towards the end of the Chinese split there, so they're probably going to ban Haven. And they haven't played Abyss yet. You know, so they could be good at Abyss, we don't know. But if you take a look at like the win rates of kind of all of their other maps, and, you know, like the general last 5 win rates of all their other maps, like they're just kind of okay. Now, this is a bit of a problem, I think, for BLG, because that's not really where you want to be. If you're an underdog team, I think you'd rather have a couple maps where you're really good and a couple maps where you're really bad, right? That way, if you so happen, you know, if the other team has a bad map veto against you or whatever, you know, and you happen to get your couple good maps, you actually have a chance of winning, right? Whereas I feel like BLG, you know, they're kind of okay at most maps. That probably isn't going to play so well when you're playing against better quality opposition. And in contrast to BLG, we then have the Chinese 3rd seed, which is Trace, because Trace have pretty much what I'm talking about there, where they have a couple maps like Ascent, where they've won 100% of their games. Their percentages in terms of their attack and defense win rate are insane. You know, they've been really, really good at Ascent this entire season, right? And Lotus is another map where they've been pretty good and good recently as well on this map, but then they also have some big weaknesses, right? Their Abyss thus far has probably been, you know, maybe one of the worst Abysses I've seen. Their Bind, you can see, it is just not very good. They've lost all 5 of their last games on Bind, so they're a different team. As you can see, they are banning Icebox. They're one of these rare teams that, you know, Icebox has obviously been in the pool all season long. They're going to ban Icebox no matter what, so you know that. And so they are going to have some pretty big weaknesses here if you are playing against them, if you're another team. But also, they're going to have some strengths like their Ascent, where, you know, they could potentially give you a game on that map as well. And I think that overall, you'd rather have Trace's map pool than BLG's, because, hey, they could probably beat some of these teams that they're going to play on Ascent, right? And then who knows what will happen on map 3. They probably can get to a map 3. Okay, now on to FPX. And FPX, I know a lot of you will think of Master Shanghai and what they did at Master Shanghai. And, oh, they were so close to beating both Genji and Team Heretics, the eventual 2 finalists in that tournament. So, you know, they must be coming into this feeling pretty good. Well, actually, more recently in some of the Chinese games, it hasn't been going that well for them, and you can see that in some of these stats as well, particularly if you look at the last 5 games. Yes, their Abyss actually has probably been one of the better Abysses that we've seen. You know, they played 2 games against, you know, 2 decent teams in the playoffs and looked very good when playing it, right? So their Abyss could be pretty good, but when you look at the rest of their map pool and how it's gone, you see that there is some real struggles here for them overall, that it is not going that well on kind of the rest of the map pool for FPX, and they do have some things to figure out. They are kind of banning Sunset more recently now, after the map pool changed. This has kind of become their ban of Sunset. You won't be surprised to learn that Metascore-wise, FPX were the lowest in terms of their Metascore overall. But I think if you're expecting FPX to, you know, be this team that's gonna, you know, play like they did at Master Shanghai, they're going to need to improve from where they last played to get to that point, because more recently it has not been going that well. And now on to EDG. And EDG are an interesting spot as well in this tournament, because they have a pretty tough group to start off with, right? That's the first thing that you have to keep in mind. And they kind of have the BLG problem, where if you take a look at their numbers here on some of their maps and look at their last 5 games on a lot of these maps as well, you see a lot of okay, right? Not much dominance, a lot of okay. And again, you have to remember, this is against, you know, the other Chinese teams as well, right? These last 5 games on a lot of these maps. So, you know, it's a lot of like mixed, varied results against other Chinese teams, which you might be concerned about if you are an EDG fan, right? That's not really where you want to be coming into this tournament, with a kind of just okay map pool against what is a pretty hard group of Foot, G2, and Paper Rex, right? There is no easy game for them to win there. Every game is going to be tough for them, and they're probably going to need to have one of these maps. It could be Haven, where they have played 3 times. They did lose once, but they've, you know, particularly on their defense side, have been pretty good. Haven might be a saving grace for them, but they're going to need to improve some of these maps, I think, if they want to get out of that group. But now let's come to Americas, and let's start with Sen City. Here's the thing about Sentinels. Throughout this entire season, Sentinels have kind of had 3 maps that have largely, I think, really helped to propel them to get to Masters Madrid, win Masters Madrid, etc. And do everything they have this season. And those 3 maps were split, mainly split. But then also their Sunset and Lotus has been pretty good, particularly earlier on in the season when they were doing particularly well. Those are the 3 maps that have kind of, been really good for them. When we take a look at some of the other maps that have been in the pool, for the entire season, Ascent, Bind, Icebox, those maps have been a bit more shaky, right? Definitely you could win against Sentinels on those maps overall. It's not impossible to beat them on those maps. And then you've got Abyss and Haven coming in. Now, when we take a look at their data for these maps, obviously they have not played Abyss yet, so we don't know if they're any good at Abyss. Their Haven, I thought looked okay, but not spectacular. Certainly not, like, oh, they've got a dominant map here. And they've started banning Icebox as well, right? Here's the problem for Sentinels, though, that you've got kind of 2 maps left, right, that you were good at, which is Lotus and Sunset. But on both of these maps, on both Lotus and Sunset, where you look at their comps, they started changing their comp on Lotus, so this deadlock stuff. They haven't won with this comp just yet. And they changed it on Sunset as well to a kind of more meta, I would say, Gecko Breach than what they were, kind of initially running earlier in the season. But they've just played 1 game of that as well. So essentially, on the 2 maps where, you think Sentinels of the map pool that we currently have, the maps that they were best at, they're changing their comps and it's not really working. That's not a great sign going into a tournament where your 2 good maps, you don't know what comp you're probably going to play. And then on all the other maps, you're also changing comps on some of them and it's not really working either. And you weren't good at those maps before either. You've got an unknown in Abyss. I'm just saying it's not looking great for Sentinels overall. Personally, I don't think this is looking great for them. They're gonna need to probably change back to their old Lotus comp, right? Just play the meta comp on Lotus. I still think it's the best comp on the map, and I think that would help them, and I wouldn't be shocked if they did that and their Lotus became a pretty strong map for them again. Sunset we'll have to see, because they have been a bit more up and down on that map overall. But if Sentinels want to do well in this tournament, they're probably going to need to either massively improve their Ascent or Bind, or hope that their Abyss is really good, right? They're going to need probably one of those 3 maps to be very good, to be honest, to do well in this tournament, because they're in a tough group, and right now, I'm a little concerned. Okay, moving on to Crew, and for Crew, they're another one of these strange teams that have banned Bind all this season. They have not played a single Bind. They will ban Bind no matter who they're playing. Pretty much. But with that, there are some weaknesses here for Crew as well, right? Like their Ascent here, like their Icebox here, that, in the last 5 games hasn't been good, throughout the whole season hasn't been good. So definitely some weaknesses for you to target as well. But they do have some maps, and Haven coming in, so far has looked like a pretty strong map for them. They beat Leviatán on Haven, so that's pretty good. The thing is with Crew as well is they do play very meta, right? They haven't played Bind, so this is out of 60 instead of 70, but 56 out of 60, they play a lot of meta comps, right? So if you're coming up and you're playing Crew, you pretty much know, hey, if we can play Ascent or we can play Icebox against them, they're going to be pretty weak there, and they're going to play fairly meta stuff, right? They're not going to go too crazy in terms of throwing as a curveball. We can probably know what to expect and probably beat them. Okay, now on to G2, and here's where that map pool is. It looks pretty good for the most part, right? These are good numbers for the most part across the board. There's basically only 2 weaknesses, which is Sunset and Icebox. Now, they've started banning Sunset, so Sunset shouldn't really be a problem for them because they're going to ban that map, most likely. Icebox is the question for G2. Icebox is what matters for G2 in this tournament. Because actually, the start of the season, G2's Icebox was pretty good. They actually did pretty well on that map. And then it all started falling apart. They lost 13-1 to T1 at Shanghai. And since then, Icebox has been a disaster for them, right? Jonah even said this after one of their games where they actually won Icebox against Leviatán.
Talk to me about preparing for Lev and what you expected from them, and if they did or did not deliver.
Well, preparation for Lev, we knew they were going to pick Icebox, so we just had to make sure, we had to get our stuff down because our Icebox is terrible.
So it's clear that they even know themselves that their Icebox isn't very good. And something needs to change there for their Icebox. Otherwise, they have this massive, glaring weakness, essentially, in their map pool. That said, that is only one map, and they're going to ban their other bad map. On everything else, they can give you a game, and they'll probably be favored on maps like Bind and Lotus, which are particular strong suits for G2. And then finally we have Leviatán, and Leviatán actually had the joint second highest rating alongside Gen G, slightly below Fnatic in terms of the average TMV rating for them here, but certainly very much up there. And for Leviatán, the main benefit I think that they got is that they were banning Lotus towards the end of the Americas season, but then they were forced to play Lotus against G2 in the grand final. Thing is, G2 are a good Lotus team. Lev managed to win that game on Lotus. That was their ban before, so if they also have a good Lotus, maybe they didn't even know that they did have a good Lotus, but if they do also have a good Lotus, their Abyss looked pretty good in their one game that they played, but it is just one game, so keep that in mind, but that looks pretty good, and the rest of their map pool also is very solid. So basically, if Lev have a good Lotus as well, on top of everything else that they've shown, watch out. Everyone needs to be on high alert for Lev, because if they have a full 7 map pool and can choose to ban your best map as well, they're going to be a big threat at this tournament. But the good news doesn't end there for Leviatán either, because what I decided to do was take every one of my rankings for all the teams on all of the different maps and basically average them out. You know, what was the average on each of the map scores? And this is what we ended up with. And you can see how many teams actually, you know, ban each one as well here with their main ban pick. And the thing is, when you look at this, Lev have an advantage as well, because the two maps that teams are generally pretty good at this tournament is Lotus and Sunset. So if you are a team that bans Lotus and Sunset, that gives you a bit of an advantage, right? Because you're banning a map that probably most teams are pretty decent at. And guess what? Leviatán like to ban Lotus. The other team that sometimes bans Lotus in this tournament is DRX. So DRX also have a bit of an advantage there. In terms of teams that probably will ban Sunset, you're looking at teams like G2, FPX, Talon might do it as well. And actually DRX have been flipping their ban kind of between Lotus and Sunset based on matchup. So for DRX in particular, it's kind of a big advantage in terms of they're probably always going to have a pretty good ban at this tournament. Also, of course, it's an advantage to be good at maps where no one else is really that good at it. If you are good at that map, that means that you're going to have a pretty big advantage against any of those teams, right? And so when we look at what maps people aren't so good at, this one here, 6.07, the lowest in the tournament, that's Icebox, right? And this next one here, 6.13, kind of surprisingly, is actually Ascent. So if you're good at either Ascent or Icebox, you're in for a pretty good time. And this, again, is where Lev are going to absolutely shine, because I gave Leviatán a 9.5 on their Icebox. They are really good at Icebox. No one else did I have above a 7 for Icebox. Lev should have a pretty much free win against most teams, and I think there's only 3 teams that are banning Icebox as well. So against most of the teams that they're going to play against, they're going to have a very good chance at going 1-0 up because of their Icebox. And actually, if you think about the best teams at this tournament and the people that Lev are competing with to win the tournament, you're looking at teams like Fnatic. Icebox is one of their worst maps. Gen G, it's an okay map for them, but they certainly never pick Icebox. They don't think it's one of their best maps. Same for Team Heretics, a team who's okay at Icebox, but they never actually pick the map. G2, we said Icebox is one of their worst maps. They did actually beat Lev on an Icebox, but overall, G2's data on that map is not that good. Same is true, of course, for Paper Rex, where their Icebox, again, is okay, but it's certainly not the strongest map in their pool. And so when you're looking at the favorites to potentially win this tournament, Lev should have a pretty big advantage in a lot of those series against those teams, because not many of those teams ban Icebox. You know, if you want to include Sentinels in this, I didn't mention them because they do ban Icebox, so it wouldn't be a problem for Sentinels. You Sentinels fans, you're fine against Leviatán. But for anyone else, they could be in some trouble.